I know you've got some questions on what's going on in Gaza, so let me just go ahead and start with that, and just say that the Secretary General is gravely concerned by the latest developments regarding Gaza. Today's firing of a rocket from Gaza towards Israel is a serious and unacceptable violation. We're also aware of the latest reports of firing on Gaza and are monitoring events. We urge all sides to exercise maximum restraint. The Secretary General is set to meet tomorrow with his special coordinator, Nickolay Mladenov, who is also scheduled to brief the Security Council in person, in where he will discuss the latest developments. This is a pre-scheduled briefing. We continue to work with Egypt and all concerned parties to try to de-escalate the situation and again encourage restraint. Further escalation is likely to make an already bad situation worse, in particular for civilians in and close to Gaza. This morning, the Secretary General spoke at a meeting of the General Assembly to mark the International Day of the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. He said this is an occasion for all of us to renew our promises to end racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance, including social and ethnic discrimination, anti-Muslim hatred, and anti-Semitism. The Secretary General said the massacre at the two mosques in New Zealand 2 Fridays ago is the latest tragedy rooted in such poison, noting that he visited the Islamic Center of New York on Friday to show his solidarity and express his outrage. Today and every day, he stressed, we must stand united against racial and religious hatred and the terrorism of bigots, adding that no country or community is immune. The Secretary General noted he's asked his special advisor for the prevention of genocide, Adama Dieng, to bring together the UN system to design a strategy and plan of action to combat hate speech. And at 3 o'clock this afternoon, he will speak again at the General Assembly, this time at a meeting to mark the International Day of Remembrance of the Victims of Slavery and the Transatlantic Slave Trade. And this theme of this year is Remember Slavery, the Power of the Arts for Justice. We expect the Secretary General to express his support for the artists, writers, and poets committed to the struggle for racial equality and empowerment. And as a reminder, the Secretary General will do a stakeout tomorrow morning at 9:45, focusing on the devastation caused by the cyclone in southern Africa. The Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohammed is traveling to Bangkok after attending the 20th session of the Regional Coordination Mechanism for Africa in Marrakesh in Morocco over the weekend. On Saturday, she spoke at that session, adding that 2019 will be a defining year to deliver the promises we made to humanity through the 2030 Agenda for Africa and Africa's 2063 Agenda. Put in simple terms, she said we need to accelerate to meet the ambitions that we have set for ourselves. Actions for the Sustainable Development Goals is still to reach the scale required to address the increasingly complex and interlinked challenges facing humanity and our planet. She added that our youth potential remains underused, hindering the ability of girls and boys to shape not only our future, but our present. Her transcript is available, and my understanding she is on her way to Thailand. And on Syria, our humanitarian colleagues are alarmed by the continued reports of civilian casualties due to hostilities in northwestern Syria. We continue to call on all parties to the conflict to cease all violence and remind them of their obligations under the international humanitarian law and international human rights law to protect civilians and civilian infrastructure at all times, to exercise maximum restraint. Between the 22nd and 23rd of March, 15 people were reportedly killed and over 30 injured in eastern rural Idlib governorate. Extensive damage to physical infrastructure was also reported. And on the 23rd, 2 women and 2 children were also reportedly killed due to artillery shelling in the demilitarized zone northwest of rural Hama governorate. On the same day, 21 people were reportedly hospitalized after inhaling toxic gases in the government-controlled town of Al-Rasif. And on Mali, I just want to update you on the attacks this weekend on the village of Ogusagu in Pearl Mopti, in the Mopti region in central Mali. The UN mission in the country now says that the number of civilian casualties from the attacks has increased to over 150 dead. The peacekeeping mission also says that in addition to casualty evacuation services it provided for the injured over the weekend, it will support the visit of President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta to the village that is scheduled for today. The mission has also strengthened its presence in the area. And you will have seen that in a statement we put out over the weekend, the Secretary General said he was shocked and outraged by the reports of civilian deaths and called on the Malian authorities to redouble their efforts to bring peace and stability to central Mali. Also over the weekend, another statement, the Secretary General welcomed the establishment of a government in the Central African Republic in line with the political agreement for peace and reconciliation signed in Bangui on the 6th of February. And the UN mission in Afghanistan said today it is concerned that according to its preliminary findings, an airstrike by international forces against the Taliban carried out overnight between Friday and Saturday in Kunduz killed 13 civilians, 10 of whom were children. The mission urged relevant authorities and parties involved in the airstrikes to carry out their own inquiries into the incident and to take immediate steps to protect civilians. As you'll recall, the mission's 2018 annual report on the protection of civilians found that there's been a sharp increase in civilian casualties from aerial search operations in 2018 as compared to 2017. And also in Afghanistan, our humanitarian colleagues say that 13.5 million people in Afghanistan are severely food insecure, with over 3.5 million of them facing emergency levels of hunger, just one step away from famine as the country grapples with the worst drought in a decade, with 6 million more people affected since 2017. Compared to 2017. To date, the UN agencies and humanitarian partners have reached 4.1 million of the most affected people with support. This is over 90% of the 4.5 million people targeted for assistance. Of those reached, 400,000 people are displaced, while the rest are in drought-affected rural areas. And on Myanmar, our colleagues there say that the conflict in Rakhine and Chin states between the government and the Arakan army have displaced more than 16,000 people. The government, local communities, civil society organizations, the Red Cross movement, and international NGOs and the UN agencies are providing aid. The UN calls on all parties to the conflict to allow humanitarian access to all those in need, stressing that all parties to the fighting must uphold their responsibilities under international humanitarian and human rights law, notably the protection of civilians. And just an added note on Ebola, that WHO reports that more than 1,000 cases of Ebola have been reported in the DRC since the outbreak of 2018. As of March 23rd, 1,009 confirmed and probable cases, 621 deaths had been recorded in North Kivu and Ituri. More than 300 patients have been released following treatment. And I shall stop and answer questions. Mr. Bays.
While we've been here in the room, in the White House, President Trump has signed a declaration formally recognizing Israeli sovereignty over the Golan. Does the Secretary General, what's his reaction to this, and does he believe this is a contravention of UN Security Council resolutions and, for that matter, of the UN Charter?
It's not a matter of the Secretary General's reaction. The Secretary General's position has remained unchanged from last week to today. And for him, for the Secretary General, it is clear that the status of Golan has not changed. The UN's policy on the Golan is reflected in the relevant resolutions of the Security Council, and that policy, again, has not changed.
So is he going to reach out to President Trump and to Prime Minister Netanyahu, who has said in the last few minutes, we hold the high ground and we will never give it back?
Again, for us, the status of the occupied Golan is enshrined in Security Council resolution. His position has not changed, and we will leave it at that.
But he's not planning to make any contact with
I'm not
the
aware
US
of
or the Israelis on this.
any planned contact. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Stéphane. Just about an hour and a half ago, Roberto Marrero, which is the chief of staff of Juan Guaidó, was taken to the tribunals. He was charged with alleged terrorism and to try to kill the president of Venezuela. What is the reaction of the Secretary General as members of the international community have called for his release and for a due process?
For the Secretary General, any crackdown on the Venezuelan opposition would not only be a mistake, but also could lead to an escalation with dramatic consequences for the people of Venezuela. Maggie.
Stéphane, the UNAMA thing that you mentioned about the airstrike, do you know which country was leading that airstrike? Was it
No,
the United States?
we
or another?
understand it's the international coalition. I think you should reach out to them to see who is actually involved. All right. Yes, one more, and then Monica will brief you.
Following on Venezuela, at the end of this week, the group of contact created by the European Union with the support of Costa Rica, Uruguay, and Ecuador will meet in Ecuador. And one of the things that had been said is that they're trying to try to have Spain to be more active in the initiative is to get the United Nations and the Secretary General to be actively involved in the process to go to a dialogue. Otherwise, they believe that it will, the threshold will close and we'll have a military action within the region. Is any reaction by the Secretary General? Because we know Federica Mogherini has talked about working on the humanitarian aid, which is believed is the focus of the meeting this week.
I mean, for the Secretary General, he is, as he said himself, he supports the various regional initiatives, but I think to preserve his own independence and potential good offices, he's not actively participating in the meetings of these different initiatives, but his good offices remain available should all parties accept it. Thank you.